Community Relations Bureau, American Jewish Committee. Please understand that the Jewish community is in a state of true mourning and horror, and emotions are very high right now. This is an opportunity for our broader community to gather in support of our community, of Israel, and of the Israeli people. And so, apart from pre-approved media, we're not going to be permitting any sort of photos or videos. We're going to ask that nobody disrupt this event. Anyone who does will be asked to leave by security. And I think those are all the ground rules that I hope we can respect and abide by. You know, on Saturday morning, like many of you, I started to stir. I rolled over. I said good morning to my wife, and she put her hand on me and had grief written all over her face. And she whispered to me, "Something terrible has happened in Israel." From that moment on, I can assure you that there is nothing else that your Jewish friends, that your Jewish family, that your Jewish neighbors have been able to think about. Nothing but images of babies killed and beheaded, videos of Israeli women burned alive, grotesque scenes of bodies of entire families slain in their beds. Nothing but horror, despair, and fear for those innocents, including babies and children, that have been taken into Gaza. Nothing but frantically checking on our friends and our family in Israel, hoping desperately that they're safe, worrying in new waves as they tell us they are heading to the front lines. What occurred this past weekend was an unspeakable massacre of Jews. It was the day in which the single largest number of Jews were murdered since the Holocaust. It was our worst nightmare come true. On behalf of the Jewish community, I want to extend our deep gratitude for those with us today. For those who aren't able to be here today, but who have reached out to us this week expressing their solidarity and sorrow, and for those who have made public statements condemning these acts of terror. Your moral clarity and solidarity at this time means more than we could ever say. This afternoon, we'll hear from several leaders who wish to express their support of our community, but I know that there are many others in this room, so I'm going to ask all of our elected officials to please stand and be recognized. And can our faith leaders please stand and be recognized? The Jewish community thanks you. We are heartbroken, we are scared, and we are outraged. Outraged because during a time in which we should be grieving and mourning and supporting our community through this unspeakable tragedy, we are instead being forced to defend ourselves. We are being forced to defend our position that Jews should not, in fact, be viciously murdered in their beds, kidnapped, and raped. Let's be very clear. Anyone with a conscience should be able to quickly and easily condemn Hamas terrorism. The fact that for so many this seems difficult or even impossible, I have to tell you, is a very sad state of affairs for our society. We need the Kansas City community to be crystal clear in this moment. Regardless of your position on Israeli policy or the Israeli government, this is not the time for that conversation. Actually, this has nothing to do with that conversation. This is about condemning terrorism. You see, Hamas doesn't care about the Palestinians. They don't care about the Palestinians when they use all of their funding and infrastructure and resources to not provide clean water to the people of Gaza, not to provide electricity to the people of Gaza, not to do a single thing to improve the lives of Gazans. Instead, they build bombs and rockets so that they can murder Jews. Don't take my word for it, though. Take theirs. Hamas will gladly tell you, as they have for decades, through their writings, through their speech, that their intent is to murder Jews, to murder Israelis, to completely cleanse the entire region of Jewish life. And so when I see newspapers, when I see organizations that purport to care about human rights and civil rights lauding Hamas's actions, questioning whether they really are a terrorist organization or not, calling this legitimate resistance, I see excuses and justifications for the murder of Jews. And by the way, this genocidal death cult does not only seek to destroy Israel and murder Jews, they would love to destroy America and murder all of us as well, all Americans. Talk about a chicken celebrating KFC. So these voices must ask themselves, why is it that I care about the loss of innocent life except when those lives are Jewish? Why do you think that is? What I can tell you is that the Jewish community will never be the same after this. Israel and Israelis will never be the same. This is the moment when we remember our allies, and we will be forever grateful to those in this room and to those who have spoken out and continue to speak out. And we will remember those who celebrated our murder, and we will remember those who stayed silent. I applaud all here today for standing on the right side of history. I appreciate to the depth of my heart the elected officials and the faith leaders who have graciously responded, as I have called and texted them constantly over the last few days. In the coming weeks, we will continue to need you. We will continue to call on you because we know intrinsically and statistically that this will lead to an increase in anti-Semitism. This will lead to violence against Jews here at home. The bullying and harassment of Jewish students has already begun, and we have been spending time with them, helping them, supporting them all week from that bullying and harassment that they are receiving from their peers. But sadly, we know that it is going to get worse. And so we'll need all of you for the long haul. We will need your moral clarity and your leadership and your support more than we ever have. In just a little while, we'll have the privilege of hearing from one of the Jewish community's most prominent leaders in the last 100 years. An expert on anti-Semitism and on Israel, and someone who I and so many in this room consider to be a role model and a moral authority. There is no one better equipped to educate all of us on the reality of what's happening in Israel. We are so incredibly honored to have David Harris with us today, and I look forward to learning from him alongside you all. Right now, I'm pleased to turn it over to the Johnson County Commission Chairman, Mike Kelly, the first of several leaders here to speak in support of Israel and our community today. Chairman Kelly, your support during this time has been invaluable to us, and I'll hand it over to you.
Gavi, thank you. And on behalf of the Commission in Johnson County, on behalf of Mayor Michelson, Mayor Skoog, Mayor Popa, Councilmember Hill, Representative Stogstill, and the rest of the Kansas delegation who finds us, Representative, thank you as well for being here. And all of my colleagues on the Kansas side of the state line, we mourn with you our Jewish brothers and sisters in Johnson County. And we express solidarity with our Jewish brothers and sisters today because we know that you are hurting. Like you, we unequivocally condemn the terrorist actions of Hamas. It is a terrorist organization, and this planned massacre which was truly barbaric, is in no way consistent with international law, and we very much stand with Israel's right to defend itself against terrorism. We know that today will not be the end of your suffering, and our unequivocal support does not end today. We know that the rise in anti-Semitism that we have seen in the past years in our community will unfortunately continue and exacerbate because of the narratives that have arisen. And we know that that does not just affect our Jewish brothers and sisters. It was not a decade ago where unspeakable acts came to Johnson County. And the loss of life at those events were not limited to our Jewish brothers and sisters. We know that at the Jewish spaces in our community, others, including my own family, share services. My 3-year-old son goes to play class at the Jewish Community Center, and we're so grateful for that service. So we know that our paths are intertwined and our safety is intertwined. And when we think about Israel's security, that is American security. Hamas and its funder Iran aim to destroy not just Israel, but also America. When they chant death to Israel, the next phrase out of their mouth is death to America. So we know that we must remain clear-headed, and it's incumbent upon all of us, especially our elected leaders, to demonstrate the moral leadership right now, especially so that our Jewish community knows that when we say never again, we definitely mean it. It is not limited to one political party. It doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum. In this moment, we must all stand together. We must condemn these terrorist actions. We must stand with our neighbors in Israel and their right to defend themselves. And more importantly, it can't stop today. We'll continue to stand with you. Johnson County will continue, as it has done this week, to light our facilities blue and white in solidarity with our Jewish brothers and sisters. And my family will continue to pray for you. I will continue to be here. And again, we thank you and thank you to all of my fellow leaders for standing with me in support of the Jewish community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairman. I now welcome to the stage Dr. Reverend Rodney Williams.
There is a passage of scripture in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 31, verse 15. And it says these words, "This is what the Lord says, and voices is heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because there are no more." As an African-American person of faith and a good conscience, I am deeply grieved and hurt by the cowardly and evil attacks of Hamas and the terrorism against defenseless men, women, and the children of Israel. We pray for all of those that fear for their safety. We pray especially for all of the children that have been shaken at the core. I and the Swope Parkway United Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival, mourn with you and for you during this tragedy. This is a hurtful and a shameful reminder that anti-Semitism is still a reality across the world. And although the power of anti-Semitism has a strange endurance, it does not and it will not endure or outlive justice and righteousness. Therefore, along with the Swope Parkway United Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, and the Poor People's Campaign, the national call for more revival, we stand with you shoulder to shoulder, not just today, not just tomorrow, but until justice runs down like a river and righteousness as a mighty stream. Shalom.
Thank you, Reverend. And I would now love to welcome to the stage Reverend Cheryl Bell from the Church of the Resurrection.
I serve as pastor of Community Justice for Resurrection United Methodist Church, and I'm standing in for Senior Pastor Adam Hamilton, who is not in town. He is with 450 others who have been safely diverted from their Holy Land and Egyptian trip that they took this past week. He, along with our staff and congregation, have been holding Israel and thousands of people in prayer who are mourning and are grieving their lost loved ones. We also are praying for those who are afraid and continue to live under the threat of further violence and loss of life. We have also been praying for the Jewish community, our dear sisters and brothers who we love dearly, and specifically for its leaders as they care for their communities here in Kansas City. At Resurrection, we stand united with the Jewish community, both in this community and around the world. We join in condemning the violence that has taken so many innocent lives and devastated so many families and communities. As it relates to the conflict between Palestinians and Israelis, we have sought to foster understanding and to stand with both. But our willingness to stand with Palestinians does not extend to the Hamas and the horrific acts committed by them. We understand that our Jewish siblings are grieving the single deadliest day for them since the Holocaust, which you shared with us, Gavi. We have been and will continue to pray for peace. Our love goes out to all of you, and we will continue to endure with you on this journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend. I would now like to invite Alvin Brooks, a real legacy in the Kansas City community, to join us on stage.
Alvin Brooks, why are you here? You're not Jewish. You're a Catholic Christian. Why are you here? Alvin Brooks is here because of a situation that occurred against humanity this past Saturday, the Shabbat in the Jewish community. To the people who occupy a little piece of real estate called Israel. People who were under the color of darkness, murdered, slaughtered. Babies, children, senior citizens, some abducted by those who want to see that Israel exists no more. That's why Alvin Brooks is here, to offer support to the people of Israel and my Jewish brothers and sisters right here in Kansas City metropolitan area. What occurred a week ago Saturday was an attack against humanity. Not only the Israeli people, not only the Jews across the world, but humanity. Scripture tells us in that book of Genesis that in the beginning God created heaven and earth and everything therein. The creatures that crawl, the fish of the sea, the fowl of the air, and then decided to make what? Humankind. And how? In the likeness and image of the Creator. That's all of us. The Israeli people and those who are Jewish here and all over the world were made in that likeness and image of the Creator. Therefore, we must mourn with them. Them today, us tomorrow. With the kind of terrorist attacks that we've seen. Not only 9/11, but now a situation that's next to the Holocaust on Adolf Hitler. Every faith community ought to be represented someplace in these United States. coming out and saying we support our Jewish brothers and sisters, wherever they are, and more specifically, right here in this Kansas City metropolitan area. So I'm here, Alvin Brooks, to let it be known and go on record that I support you, my brothers and sisters who are Jewish. And I say that I mourn with you. And anytime terrorists do the kind of thing that they did a week ago Saturday, justice will have to prevail. So the Catholic Church may not be represented here. But my priest, Father Leonard, would you please stand, sir? Thank you. But St. Monica Catholic Church is represented here. And my prayer is that God continue to bless you and keep you strong and give you the courage to move on. And yes, we will mourn and we will cry and we will pray and all those kind of things, but there's work to be done. And it begins with each one of us. Shalom.
So blessed to have your allyship, Alvin, as always. And please welcome next our very own Mayor of Kansas City, Missouri, Mayor Quinton Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks, who always brings things together. So what I will say for you is I promise, I believe I'm the last politician you have to hear from. A few things that I want to say and share with all of you today. The first are just a few vignettes. I'm not an expert on the issues. We have expertise here. I'm not Jewish. We have a number of Jewish folks here. But I am a human being. I am someone who has been able to live a life positively impacted by fellow human beings, by Jews, by travels to Israel, and someone whose heart was broken on Saturday. First, let me thank, as Chairman Kelly did, our Missouri side representatives. And the thing that I want to note about them, they're exceptional people, all in their own right. Some are to my political left, some are to my political right. All of us are here because we know what was wrong and what was done was wrong, and that we stand together to make sure we make that clear to everyone in our state, everyone in our country, and everyone who will listen to us when we say barbarism, terrorism should never be accepted and should never be justified. As to the vignettes in my life, I've been blessed in a number of different ways, one of which was, like Chairman Kelly, I had the chance to go to school on the state line here in Kansas City. Different school, but down the street. And when I started at school a long time ago, I was about 7 or 8 years old. My first friend in the class was a Jewish kid. I don't know, Jewish kid and the black kids were kind of all alone. But I got to know his family. He got to know mine. We lived in drastically different places. In many ways, came from very different backgrounds. But for me, I didn't know religion or race or our differences. I knew my fellow person. Fast forward some years later. When I was in law school, I did something which I hear is wonderful. I was able to do a mitzvah for this couple. A child of Iraqi Jewish descent and a Persian Jew got married, so the father-in-law said, you have to come out to the wedding and stay an extra week. I've been to Israel twice. And so in my extra week, I just walked around and talked to people and found my way in this conversation of other young people who were just trying to live their lives. And I remember talking to one of them, a young woman, and I said, what got you to move to Israel? She was from France. And she said, I just want to live in peace. And when you think about the struggles of so many who have made that journey, so many who last weekend were just trying to live their lives in peace, it makes me think of the humanity I knew in a classroom in the early 1990s with my friends. It made me think of those people there. And it made me think more recently of this past Monday at Congregation Temple B'nai Yehuda. I thank you all for bringing people together, but as I sat there and actually got to listen, I was sitting a few seats down from a woman whose heart was truly broken. As she sobbed, and as a group of people, myself included, embraced her, it made me think about the clarity that we need to have. And I will tell you, Gavi is not exaggerating. This week has been challenging, not just because of what happened in Israel, but in some ways being awakened by the reality that's among us. The people who look to rationalize terror, the people who look to divide us based on political issues when really we are talking about human issues. And so I make this very, very clear point. You can disagree with the politics of Israel or America. You can find concerns with anything going on in the world. But to support, to rationalize, and to justify the barbaric murder of Jews is anti-Semitism. And we can say that clearly, strongly, proudly, and bravely. And so what I ask you all to do over the days, weeks, months, and years ahead, be the person there for others who will need an embrace. Be the one who is standing with moral clarity in our humanity. And remember that you are standing up for what is right, standing for those who grieve, standing for those who want to live in peace, and standing for all of our humanity. God bless you, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Really well said. And Mayor Lucas is one of the people who got a 7 a.m. text from me on Saturday morning and has been very responsive ever since. I'd like to now welcome to the stage Dr. Kurt Graham, the president of the Harry Truman Library and Museum, who will introduce our next guests.
Thank you. I spent the day at the Truman Library with Dr. Alan Mendoza of the Henry Jackson Society and David Harris, former head of the AJC and a friend now of many years. And we were discussing Truman's legacy and Jackson's legacy and how we might do some collaborative programming to teach peace and prosperity and all the things that those two important legacies represent for us. And as I thought about that legacy today in light of this event, I thought, Harry Truman was a man whose life was forged and developed largely in the crucible of war. He fought up close and personal in World War I. He had to bring World War II to a very dramatic conclusion. And he took a huge political hit by refusing to launch World War III on the Korean Peninsula. My friends, like Harry Truman, we are met in a time of war. And as Gavi pointed out in her opening remarks, this is not just a war in some distant place. I don't have any family in Israel. Unless there's someone from Kansas City that I know who happens to be visiting there, I probably don't have any friends in Israel. So why do I care what's going on? I could bow my head for a moment of silence and say that's too bad and go to the game. But I can't do that. And I can't do that because of what Gavi said. Because this war is not simply being fought in the Middle East. It's being fought, sadly, by security forces at synagogues and temples in this country. It's being fought in our high schools, in our middle schools, and sadly even in our elementary schools. That's a war that touches every one of us, no matter how we look at it. There was a point in Harry Truman's life, he was getting older, and there was a delegation who came from Japan to honor him. I believe it was his birthday. And someone got up and they were honoring him, and they said, well, Mr. Truman, when we were your enemies, And he said, we weren't enemies. He said, we just had to win the war. My friends, I commend to you the words of Harry Truman. We have to win the war. And I'm very grateful to have friends and associates like the two I'm about to introduce who are on the front lines of this war. Dr. Alan Mendoza is the head of the Henry Jackson Society in London, and a fabulous scholar and someone who brings an international perspective, again, to remind us this is not simply a Middle Eastern problem. This is not simply an American problem. This is a global problem. It's an ancient problem. And of course, I'm delighted also to be able to say a few words of introduction about my good friend David Harris. You all can Google him and find out about all the awards and accolades that he's gotten over the years. But here's my personal view of why hearing from him today is important to you. David has spent his life in a pretty heavy business. He has been on the front lines of fighting hate and terror and anti-Semitism his whole life. And yet, he is one of the most positive, hopeful, energetic people I've ever been around. And I marvel at that, and I admire that. Because if we ever need hope, if we ever need that kind of energy, if we ever need to look positively to the future, it's now. And so I'm delighted that we'll be able to hear from him and hear his perspective, which is very keen and very well informed. Before turning it to Alan, I just want to add my voice and my faith to those of these tremendous faith leaders who have spoken from across the spectrum. It's not a political spectrum, it's a human spectrum. And to add my conviction that the God who unites us in grief is mighty to save and mighty to comfort. And it is my deepest prayer that we may find comfort in that salvation, and that those who so desperately need it may find salvation in that comfort. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kurt, and thank you all, everyone here, those in the room, those watching, for showing their solidarity with Israel. Now, Alvin Brooks started with a very powerful statement saying, why is Alvin Brooks here? You're probably wondering, why is this guy with a British accent here doing the same thing? The same reason that Alvin Brooks is here is why I am here as well, and why all of you should know that on Saturday, one of the most heinous crimes in history was committed. In history. It will go down in the annals of history, much like 9/11, much like atrocities similar to that, as a day of infamy in the chronicles of humanity. And just as you feel it here, you feel the need to come together to speak out against that and to say, we do not accept that as a standard for our common humanity. So Kansas City, so I'm here from the UK to say the same thing. And we in Britain have stood up and made ourselves felt together with you in America and others around the world on this subject. You will have seen the British government has been solid in its support for Israel. Even today, we saw earlier today, the British Navy will be dispatching ships to support Israel in its hour of need, following the lead of the US Navy doing the same thing, because our two nations understand and have always understood the value of liberty, the value of democracy, the value of human rights, and how, if you do not stand up and defend them and defend those who are under attack and under assault, we all lose out as a result. Something unprecedented happened in the UK over the last couple of days. The King spoke out about this. The King does not normally speak out about issues like this. The Prince and Princess of Wales issued statements decrying what had happened in Israel, showing quite clearly that Hamas was beyond the pale and needed to be called out for its evil acts. Political leaders from across the spectrum. And remember, in the UK, until recently, you had a sympathiser of Hamas in charge of one of our two great political parties, the Labour Party at the time. Well, now political leaders across the country are united in grief, united in common humanity, united in understanding what the message is, the message that must ring out, that we cannot abide what happened in Israel on Saturday, when terrorists came across the border, murdered men, women, children, took them hostage, raped women, did this premeditated in an orgy of death and destruction. That is something none of us can stand. However, I must say that in common with some of the other speakers, what is worrying me and what should worry you is some of the reactions that we are seeing in the media and on the ground from our fellow citizens, people who should know much better than what they are doing. And to look at the media for one moment, they have a responsibility to record the facts rather than to talk about conjecture and context and this activity. And the facts are really simple. The facts were that on Saturday, evil overtook the people of Israel. There's no spinning that around. There's no context to that. That is what happened. And yet we hear even in the UK, the national broadcaster, the BBC, refusing to label Hamas as a terrorist group, claiming it would harm their impartiality were they to do so. Well, you laugh, but the reality is, I know you were shocked. There can be no impartiality when it comes to evil. You're either on the side of good or you're on the side of evil. And it doesn't take a genius to work out what someone should be doing in that respect. But leave that aside. What really worries me and what worries the Jewish community in the UK and all those right-thinking people who do not want to see evil flourish is that there have been marches, protests, attacks by people who somehow think it's okay to protest in favour of what Hamas did. It beggars belief that in the streets of London, in the middle of our capital, we have had people shouting and screaming in support, essentially, of what's happened. They will claim they're saying in support of Palestine and free Palestine. But you will know, all of you will know, everyone will know for certain now that the mask has slipped. And the reality is that those who chant from the river to the sea are not talking about some cheery binational solution where Jews and Palestinians will live happily together with each other. They're not even talking about handing Jews their passports, go somewhere else. They're talking about murder. They are talking about genocide. That is what that slogan means, and when you hear it in your streets, that is what those people are saying. Whether they know it or not, that is what they are doing. In our societies, in our free democracies, taking advantage of our freedom to spread a message of hate and spread a message of destruction. And I tell you where this leads. It firstly leads to fear among people who are horrified by what's happening. In London, we just read today that 2 Jewish schools have shut their doors because they are so worried about attacks on their own children that they daren't keep the schools open while this hatred is festering on our streets at the moment. And they're begging the government to get involved and shut these demonstrations down. But I'm a local elected official in London, in the city of Westminster. My postbag is full of Jewish parents worried about their children's safety. Just think about this at the moment. 2023, London, a great European city, and people are terrified for their children to be attacked on account of terrorists attacking and killing Jews in Israel, thinking it'll happen again in London. And that is across the board in Europe. The same is happening in the US. I know there are fears similar to that. Well, we as societies have to do better than that. We have to do better than that. Because the reality is that if the streets are not safe for some of us, then the streets are not safe for any of us. We cannot surrender the streets to the mob. We have to be a united, cohesive force out there, standing together in this room and standing together outside this room in the face of those who seek to divide us. And so my message is simple. We are doing the right thing. A terrible event has occurred, and we are standing together because of it. We in the UK, we across Europe, we here in the US, we here in Kansas City are doing that. Let's take from this a moment to think about how a tragedy like this could actually lend itself to something positive. The positive would be if we can take this message out here, go beyond this room, spread it far and wide, and make it clear that we will always stand with the victims of terror, never with the terrorists, and together we will win. Thank you.
I actually don't know what I'm about to say. And that's not meant as a joke. My head and my heart and my soul are filled with so many coexisting and competing and conflicting emotions that I'm spinning. For the last 6 days, like so many, I don't think I got more than a few hours sleep. I'm not even sure I'm coherent. You see, both of my parents survived the Holocaust. And I never thought I would say this, certainly not in public, but I'm glad they're not here. I don't know how they would have coped. They survived, and this country offered them refuge. Miraculously, my mother during the war, my father after the war. And they believed that the great hope of humanity was this country, with all of its flaws. But they also understood something else. That while they were trapped in Europe, and while Adolf Hitler was teasing the world, saying, if you care so much about the Jews, take them. 1937, 1938, 1939, take them. And essentially every country in the world, including this country, said no. So my parents instilled in me something else from a very early age. The missing piece of the story was Israel. Because in 1937 and 38 and 39, Jews would not have been trapped had there been an Israeli embassy in Bucharest or in Paris or in Brussels or a consulate in Krakow or Marseille. So for them to be here this evening in Kansas City, where we gather because of what I believe was genocidal intent. I repeat, genocidal intent. It was not an incursion, the word used by WQXR, the classical radio station in New York, to describe what happened. It was not a terrorist attack, as some university president described it. It was an act of genocidal intent to further the mission of Adolf Hitler. And not only do we have to grapple with the ever-present emotions, because whoever wrote 6 Degrees of Separation was not writing about the Jews. We're too small in number. At most 1 degree, maybe 2 degrees of separation. As we meet here, the faces before me are the countless Israelis I know. My wife has 2 sisters who moved to Israel 50 years ago and have created their own families of children and grandchildren. My daughter-in-law an Israeli whose entire family is in Israel. My own family. My friend, the professor at Brandeis University, who just lost his daughter and his son-in-law slaughtered. It's very personal. And we need to call it by what it is: genocidal intent, driven by bestiality, barbarism, and yes, though some seem to object, animalistic behavior, and I may be offending some animals, even in saying it. References have been made to 9/11. Most of you, all of you, were alive and old enough to recall 9/11. The most tragic day in American history, perhaps, since December the 7th, 1941. But since we're talking about 9/11 here in the United States and the 3,000 people who were murdered by a similar ideology, Al-Qaeda is a kissing cousin of Hamas. Please consider this. In American terms, not 3,000, but 35,000 were killed. Because the population of Israel is a tiny fraction of the population of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine that 35,000 Americans had been killed on 9/11. Imagine that as many as 70,000 Americans had been wounded. And imagine that close to 5,000 Americans had been kidnapped, mutilated, paraded. How would this country have reacted? And whether it was 1 degree or 6 degrees of separation, how would each of us have reacted? Oh, and by the way, lest we forget, on 9/11, it was not just Americans who were killed. There were many other nationalities, and it speaks to the point of several of our speakers. Oh, and by the way, more than 20 countries today have experienced the murder, the rape, the kidnapping that we saw on Saturday, including more than 20 American citizens. And not all of them were Jewish. Not at all. I went through 4 stages of emotion as I look back since Saturday. The first was disbelief. It was beyond even my imagination, and I've spent my lifetime on the front lines. But it was impossible to believe that this could have happened. And so I told myself, no, it's fake news. It's malicious fake news. It's misinformation. It's disinformation. But the news kept coming, and the phone calls kept coming, and the messages kept coming, and I moved to the second phase, dismay. Was it possible? Was it possible on this scale of bestiality? Children? Babies? Beheading, decapitation, rape, mutilation? Then I moved to the third phase. Fortunately, it was brief. It was depression. Not in the clinical sense of the word, but in a sense of feeling the weight of Jewish history. How many times? How many ways? How many places before we can finally achieve shalom, peace? Will it ever end? and most especially, having bribed and brainwashed my children to have children, what awaits my precious grandchildren, the oldest of whom is 7 and who's about to be joined by her 7th sibling or cousin? What awaits them? At the end of the day, if our job, my job, was to bequeath to my children and grandchildren a safer, more secure, more peaceful, more respectful world, how grievously have we failed? What awaits them? But as I said, that lasted just a moment because I couldn't let it consume me. And that brought me to this stage, determination. They're not going to beat me. They're not going to win. They can't win. And not just for my sake and my grandchildren's sake, but for your sake. And not just because I'm Jewish and I have close family in Israel, but for your sake. For everyone's sake. My wife was born and raised in another Arab place, Libya. It's a separate story. But Jews who lived in Libya long before the Arabs invaded and conquered and occupied Libya was forced to flee. In 1967, not a single Jew was left in Libya except the bodies of those who were murdered and mutilated by the mobs that were looking for my wife and her family as well. But they were lucky. Because when ISIS came along a few years ago, you'll remember, they couldn't find the Jews. But their bloodlust required them to find the infidel. And Pastor, who do they find? They found the Christians. And who among us can forget how those people were forced to kneel with their heads covered while the ISIS terrorists brandished the big sword and beheaded each and every one of them. The Jews were gone. They couldn't fulfill the traditional role of scapegoat. And then it was the turn of the Christians. Ladies and gentlemen, we're all in this together. Because I can tell you that for the ideology and the theology and the eschatology of Hamas, of ISIS, of Al-Qaeda, moderate Muslims who dare to stand up and affirm our common sisterhood and brotherhood, who talk about pluralistic values, who talk about the fact that we are all created in the image of God, are even more likely to be on the hit list. We're all in this together. But I watch, as Alan and others said, the different reactions in the world. I would have liked to believe, I would have hoped that after the experiences that we have witnessed of the Holocaust, of slavery, of all the pathologies and evils, that we would have understood not only that we must reject them, but we have to stand up. And stand up unambiguously, courageously if necessary. And many have stood up. And some of those are right here in this room, and especially those of you on the stage who've spoken out as well as as showing up. But there again, as we remember from the Holocaust, so many remain silent. But then they use the excuse that they didn't know. I wasn't there to judge their news sources. But is there a person on earth in the year 2023 that could credibly say we didn't know? and yet somehow were not motivated to speak up, or if they spoke up, stuttered and stammered and equivocated. One university president, it's in the news. Congressman Richie Torres tweeted about her and said, "You answered that you can't respond to every world event, Madam President? We have invested our trust in America in our institutions, especially in our universities, to not only teach but defend core values that define our society. And surely the right to live without genocidal intent and without the fear of beheading of children qualifies." And how many people that you know in the public space have said, "I can't comment, it's too complicated"? Well, maybe the history and politics is complicated. I don't know where it's not, including right here. But what's complicated about 40 babies being not just murdered but beheaded? What's complicated about it? You saw a member of Congress being chased by journalists with a very simple question. It was not a question about longer-term political solutions. Sure, there may be differences. It's a very basic question. Can you condemn the murder of innocent children? You may have seen. She ran away. She ran away. A member of the United States Congress, elected to advance the purpose of this country, ran away from a question as simple, as stark as that. But it gets even worse. We've seen it. Harvard is supposed to attract bright students, isn't it? Or so we're led to believe. Well, IQ does not necessarily equal EQ. Maybe the Harvard admissions office going forward better spend more time on EQ than it does on IQ. Because when a group of more than 30 organizations on campus, accredited by the student government, declare that Israel is responsible. Israel is responsible for what we saw on October the 7th. Israel is responsible, and forgive me for returning, but I can't escape from singling out, targeting, murdering, decapitating, raping, mutilating, and parading with a level of cruelty that, as you may know, has gone to taking the cell phones from the people they kidnapped or others and calling the families, showing images on the screen of their mutilated, raped, murdered, decapitated. And Harvard students, joined by students at Columbia and other prominent universities, have no hesitation. And the president of the student law group at NYU, a great school, said the same thing publicly. Ladies and gentlemen, as we watch what happens in Israel, I'm here to say that something is very fundamentally wrong right here at home. Right here at home. And let me tell you, though you know, if those students and some of their professors can't find the human emotion to make a simple sentence, I object, I abhor, I detest, doesn't change my stance on the political settlement. You have your view, I have mine. Fine. something has gone very wrong. And if they don't have the EQ, don't think it's limited to Jewish kids. So we have a big job to do. And the final thing is we have to remind ourselves and share with others that there is a story here, there's a storyline, there's a history. Now, I know the word history tends to create yawns, rolls of the eye. Oh, God, is he going to start with history, and where is he going to begin, and when will this end? But without an understanding of history, these absurd claims on social media go unchallenged. Ladies and gentlemen, do you know, do those watching, that there has never in history been a sovereign state of Gaza? Ever. Do you know that for hundreds of years Ottoman Turkey ruled Gaza as Muslims and never once thought to give it sovereignty? Do you know that for 20 years after the creation of Israel, Egypt ruled Gaza, imposed military rule, and never once talked about sovereignty? Do you know, for those who talk about the Nazi-like regimes of Israelis, the apartheid, the genocide, that in 1967 there were 350,000 people in Gaza? And thanks to Israel's genocidal policies, today there are 2 million. I wish we had learned that strategy when we faced genocide not that long ago. Do you know that in 2005, Israel completely and totally withdrew from Gaza and gave it its first chance in history to govern itself, hoping that Gaza would follow the model of Singapore? Instead, Gaza chose to follow the model of Syria. Do you know that in 2007, Hamas ousted the Palestinian Authority in Gaza, threw many of their leaders off the roofs of apartment buildings? And look and see, when was the last time Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority set foot in Gaza? He wouldn't dare. Do you know, because the media is not telling us, when they talk about the blockade and the suffocation, that Gaza has 2 borders, not 1. You wouldn't know it from following the media. Egypt shares a border with Gaza. Egypt is not under Israel's jurisdiction. But Egypt has the same interest in closing its borders as Israel, because Hamas and its Muslim Brotherhood ideology threaten Egypt as much as they threaten Israel. And do you know that even today, Israel is being criticized for not providing the fuel, the electricity, to a state on its border that has declared war? Well, if I recall correctly, if the Japanese ever asked FDR to provide electricity or fuel during the Second World War, it would have been laughed at. Not to mention, Alan, since you're here from the UK, had there been requests from Germany for essential supplies from Britain, what would the reaction have been? And do you know that ultimately, for Israel, no one wants peace and stability and prosperity in Gaza more than Israel itself? Because you can change political leaders, but you can't change your geography. Israelis and Palestinians are destined to live together forever. And we all share the prophetic vision of a world at peace and a world in harmony. But for many Americans, for many Westerners, it's impossible to understand. The fundamental difference is that the Israeli military serves to protect the weak, the vulnerable, the children, the elderly, the disabled. And for the Hamas authority, in a worldview which is beyond our comprehension, the children, the weak, the elderly, and the disabled stand in front, not behind, in front, to be weaponized. And when Israel announced something we never did in bombing Dresden or Hiroshima or Nagasaki, when Israel told Gaza's civilians, get out because you're living in a place which houses Hamas infrastructure, get out, we have no interest in collateral damage, Hamas said, no, you stay where you are. Because in the Hamas worldview, the more casualties, the better. The more images the world's media will be able to show, the better for Hamas. And finally, Hamas does not act alone. And we in the United States and in Europe need to spend much more time focused on the network. No more equivocating. No more standing on the 50-yard line. No more moral equivalence. No more hesitation. Iran is the principal funder and arms provider to Hamas. It's essentially a wholly owned subsidiary today. And Qatar, the small country that tries to play all sides of every issue, is the principal exponent of the Muslim Brotherhood, houses Hamas leaders in Qatar, and we can't permit that to happen anymore. We need a fundamental rethinking, and not just by the United States, but Kurt, to your point earlier, by the United States and our allies and friends, beginning in Britain, that says, whatever hesitation, whatever equivocation we had before, no more. This has changed the game. Now, here in the United States, whenever there's a mass shooting, there's a kind of script. And too many of our leaders stand up and invoke thoughts and prayers. And we'll never forget the victims. And nothing will ever be the same again. And guess what? Within a day, a week, the names are forgotten except by the families. Nothing has changed. And the thoughts and prayers didn't bring a safer world. We're determined. Gavi Geller in her full-time job. The faith leaders who are here. Those of us on the front lines, we are determined to ensure that when we say never again, whether about the Shoah, the Holocaust, or about October the 7th, we mean it. And we mean it not just because of us, but because of all of us. Because we're all in this together. Martin Luther King famously said, we either learn to live together as brothers, and permit me to edit and add sisters, or we die together as fools. Together. Together. Now. Now. And tomorrow. And the day after. For the sake of the dead. And for the sake of the living. For the sake of us. And for the sake of our grandchildren. It's our responsibility to bequeath to them a better world. And no one should be judged ill by history. It's up to us. And if not us, who?
As everybody knows, there's no following David Harris, and I will not try to do so now. I have thanked a lot of people in this room, and that thanks is so deserved. But I do want to give a moment to also thank the Jewish professionals who have been working 24/7 since we heard of this news on Saturday morning. If you work for my organization, Federation, the foundation, please stand up and be recognized. And if you're on one of our boards, if you are a lay leader on one of our boards, please stand up and be recognized. Stand up. I see you equivocating. Thank you. Because this has been an all hands on deck situation. I have asked a lot of all of you. I have asked a lot of my staff. And we will continue to be asked a lot of ourselves in the coming days and weeks. So I thank you for that recognition for the hardworking professionals and lay leaders in our community. As we conclude, please know that our organization and the rest of our community is working tirelessly to address all of the various aspects and needs that this situation has presented with us. If you need us, be in touch. We are here. And I think there is no better way to conclude this program than with the singing of Hatikva. And so I invite Hazan Tal Ben Yehuda to conclude our program.
Thank you, Gavi. I'll invite you to join me if you know the words. And before we begin, to just close this ceremony, this beautiful gathering, with the words of comfort of our people. Hamakom yenachem etchem, betoch sha'ar avilet Zion v'Yerushalayim. May you be comforted by God, together with all those who are mourning Zion and Jerusalem. Please join me. Kol od baleva penima nefesh Yehudi ho.